Hey rockers, welcome back to the channel and happy Monday evening to all of you. Of course, you might be watching this on Tuesday or Wednesday, so happy week to you. Tonight, man, we're going to go down memory lane to talk about a genre of music I haven't spoken much about. I have a little bit when I did a story about the surf punks and, of course, the great Dennis Dragon. But tonight, we're going back in time to talk about the legendary duo known as Jan and Dean. Yeah, some of you metalheads and punk rockers are probably going to go, who the hell are Jan and Dean? Or, I have no interest. But the truth is, guys, I think it's something that's... It's a great form of music that if you weren't around to hear it growing up, you might not be hip to it. But I'm hip to it, man, because as a kid, my mother turned me on to Jan and Dean and the Beach Boys, Dick Dale, Link Ray, all this great music that was coming out that had that weird, distorted, crazy surf sound mixed up. You know, Jan and Dean, I got to see them live, 1985, July. And it was a pretty wild show for many reasons, which I'm going to tell you about that show. And I was like 17, 18 years old with a big old black rooster mohawk. And so I really stood out at the Jan and Dean show. Trust me. Jan and Dean were an American rock duo consisting of Jan Berry and Dean Torrence in the early 1960s. Pioneers of the California sound and vocal surf music style. Popularized by the Beach Boys later, but not much later. I also have a Beach Boys story that I could tell you because they played earlier in the few years before this, and I was locked up as a juvenile detention in a juvenile detention center as a juvenile delinquent. That's another story on this channel. You can find it right here under the video section. I got to tell you, man, seeing Jan and Dean was really a trip because I remember the movie Dead Man's Curve that came out in 1978. It was a television movie, but it was really cool. And a lot of my friends dug that movie because it had a lot of history and great music and the story of Jan and Dean, which is kind of tragic. These guys originally were a doo-wop band called the Barons back in like 1957, 58. They had Chuck Steele in the band, Arnie Ginsberg, Wally Yagi, and a guy named John Saggy Seligman that does feature into the story when I get to the live part. And for a while, those guys had Sandy Nelson, the legendary Sandy Nelson on drums. And of course, future Beach Boy Bruce Johnston originally sang and played some piano with the group as well. Jan and Arnie was the band before Jan and Dean because Dean got enlisted in the Army. And of course, Jan Berry continued with a guy named Arnie. And that Arnie is Arnie Ginsberg because Dean actually wasn't a guy that joined. He was drafted. Correction. He was drafted into the Army. That's the deal. And of course, Jenny Lee was a hit song by Jan and Arnie in 1958. It was a very surprise commercial success for that duo. They did a second and a third single in 58, but it kind of tanked. And what happened was Dean returned from the Army and joined back up with Jan, and they went on to become very famous, and that was 1959. They reached their commercial peak in the years 1963, 1964, basically. But they did a lot of great stuff. And Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys actually co-wrote and collaborated on roughly a dozen hit songs and album cuts for Jan and Dean and with Jan and Dean, including Surf City, Dead Man's Curve, and The Little Old Lady from Pasadena. But my friends, tragedy struck the band, the duo, when Jan was involved in a really bad car wreck, April 12th, 1966. He basically received severe head injuries, resulting in brain damage and partial paralysis of his body. He could not use his right arm. He had to relearn how to write with his left arm and how to walk again. It was bad. And the band was essentially over, of course. That happened. Dead Man's Curve was in Beverly Hills, by the way. April 66 is when that happened. And I tell you, man, the guy came through. He came through and he healed up and he was able to survive and mostly recover from the brain damage and the paralysis. And did you know that within 1 year, almost to the day of that car wreck, he began writing and producing in the studio again. So 1 year later, he had survived being in a coma for a couple months, was back doing vocals, writing and producing. Incredible tale in rock and roll. Of course, did you know that Jan Berry did a solo album? Yep. 1997. It's called Second Wave, and you can find that on One Way Records. Jan Berry, rest in peace. That great legendary voice and that rocker that produced and wrote so many hit songs that people just don't know about. He died on March the 26th of 2004 as a result of a seizure at the age of 62 years young. Of course, after that, Dean Torrence continued to do his own stuff with the Surf City All-Stars and some solo material and, you know, lots of other projects like that. I do have the set list. Now, I recorded the show, and you can find the recording of Jan and Dean, about 25 minutes of it, on my other YouTube channel. It's called The Church of Rock, all one word. And you can go there and subscribe, hopefully, and take a moment to subscribe here. I'd appreciate it. Hit that old like button down there if you would, and leave a comment, please, if you want. So let's get into what they played, what I have on tape that night, and what I do remember. Besides having that big black rooster Mohawk, I remember just being excited because me and my mom would sit around listening to 7-inch records of Jan and Dean, and I loved the little old lady from Pasadena a lot as a kid. Jan did most of the lead vocal work when I saw them live. Dean did some. They both did some backing vocals too. Of course, Dean doing the majority of that. But Jan surprised me because I didn't know how bad a condition he was going to be in, right? Physically and mentally and all that stuff. And the poor guy went through hell. And he did not return to normal. He just recovered a lot. But later on in his career, that went backwards and he got bad later on. And doing research for this video, I found out that he was struggling with drug addiction in the 80s. So when I saw him that night, there's a good chance that I saw him struggling, because I'll tell you what happened in a minute. When they did Strawberry Fields Forever by the Beatles, the crowd was big. The whole grandstand was packed, and I couldn't believe the reception these guys got. The crowds in the Midwest are crazy for rock and roll. That's a fact about Midwest people. The rockers go ape shit over rock and roll, and it's great whenever you play the Midwest. I'm in a band myself, or was for years anyway, and play the Midwest, and from there, Peoria, Illinois, man. And yeah, great crowds. So I made a list here of some of the songs that were on that tape that I did record. Fantastic crowd. Grandstand was packed. People were screaming so much that it was like a mini Beatles concert. The girls and stuff were going nuts for these guys. A lot of old school fans that were into these guys for sure. Do You Wanna Dance? Remember the Ramones covered that song, and they did a really good version, but they did that one. And I remember Dean Torrence saying on the recording, he was saying something about, too bad everyone's going to miss us at Live Aid. And I don't know if he was just joking or if they actually played Live Aid. If you know, leave a comment below and tell me. But he might have been joking, because it seemed very apparent that Dean was a very much of a smart-ass guy, kind of sarcastic from the stage, real quick-witted. And poor Jan, Dean was that way. Jan was up there smiling, emanating good vibes, wearing his white pants, and they both had like these Hawaiian surf type shirts on. And Jan Berry had his long curly hair. It looked really cool. And, Dean had long blonde hair, like the typical stereotypical surfer boy look, They went into Do You Wanna Dance, into Sidewalk Surfing, which was very cool. Then they did the song Indian Lake, right? And these guys were kind of, if you listen to that recording, Dean was kind of pushing the boundaries, man, telling people to act like a bunch of wild Indians or something like that. I was kind of like, and he said some stuff like, I made a note here because I really can't remember unless I write it down, man. We need wild Indians screaming. And then he did some stuff like, woo, 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 woo kind of sounds. And I was like, wow, really, bro? Damn. And then he acknowledged the Kickapoo tribe from Illinois, and he knew he had done some research apparently, and he knew that he was in Native American lands there in Illinois. But yeah, a little bit crossing the line with his Native American kind of stuff, but I do have a sense of humor because Richard Pryor is from Peoria, Illinois, and Sam Kinison, where I'm from. So I'm pretty thick-skinned when it comes to being offended, but I just had to make a note about that, man. Also, they had their old band member Johnny from the original band days, I think the doo-wop band, if I'm not mistaken. Johnny came up and was up there doing vocals with them on Indian Lake. And I remember Dean calling it an East Coast surf song. And when he referenced the East Coast, he went, "Ich," like he didn't like it because he's from the West Coast, right? And basically, it was, yeah, John Saggy Seligman, for all you trivia buffs out there. It was pretty cool, man, that they acknowledged the Kickapoo tribe, though, for sure. And Surf City was the next song, which was awesome. I love the song Surf City, the Beach Boys version, and Jan and Dean, of course. They have the classic line, "Two girls for every boy." Very funny. When I was a kid, I thought that was cool. You know, it just was a cool thing at the time. I loved that song. I gotta say, man, when Jan and Dean were jamming, they had a full band up there. Guitars, bass. Everybody was doing vocals, very multi-layered. And the keyboards, though, were obnoxious and loud, man, like really loud. The keyboards were overbearing, almost to the point of drowning out the drums kind of loud. And it was crazy, but it was kind of psychedelic to me. And I was like, this is whack. It's almost punk rock in its dissidence. Because at times up there, they were like jamming and just kind of little off key here and there. And it was just, I loved it. I loved Jan and Dean. They were great. After they did Surf City, guys, they did, of course, Surfin' USA, which was awesome. That's where my recording ends. So I did not get the complete show at the beginning or the end of the show. But they came back out because everybody was saying, "We want more, we want more, we want more." And it was super loud. Again, I can't relay to you unless you hear that recording how that crowd was. It was crazy. I almost thought it was pre-recorded audience played through the PA, but then you could tell during certain parts, it was indeed a great and wild crowd in Peoria, Illinois back in 1985 in July to see Jan and Dean. But I do have another memory. Oh, actually, no. They came back out. They came back out and did an encore, but I didn't get all of it. I got 3 songs from the encore. Damn it. Damn it, bloody, slow the hell down. Barbara Ann, legendary song. It was a very long jam that ended up riffing into the Batman theme song. And it was crazy. Talk about punk surf sounds. Very cool stuff, man. And by the way, I got to shout out, man, some of these punk surf bands that I like, man, like Dick Dale and the Surfaris and the Trashmen and the Ventures and, of course, the Surf Punks and Agent Orange. Yeah, good stuff. And again, Dick Dale, king of the guitar, surf guitar. Anyway, they did Barbara Ann, then they did I Get Around. And I made a note about that one too, man. The drums were extremely driving and awesome, but the keyboards were drowning it out. Like I say, man, they did Fun, Fun, Fun. Another Beach Boys classic, and also Jan and Dean's version is great. A wild version, actually. The keyboards were super nuts. The guy was using effects on it, and the vocals were a little off key here and there. But it was still good. It was Jan and Dean, man. But here's the deal. They did a version of Strawberry Fields Forever by the Beatles, right? And it was painful to watch. This is the point of the show where I think Jan Berry might very well have been battling with addiction issues, because at some point, it's like he just wasn't there. He wasn't there. And I knew he had, you know, some brain damage and stuff like that. So I'm being tender to talk about this and not disrespect the man or that kind of stuff, brain damage. But man, he literally had to, the guys noticed that it was going on and his vocals stopped. He was like, "Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to." And then he, all of a sudden, all I can say was he spaced out at some point and stopped singing, stopped kind of like he didn't know where he was at. And the other guy had to take over on lead vocals, and everyone was trying to make it look like it was all, it's all good, but it wasn't. And you could tell, and it was a painful thing to watch. And my only regret that is I didn't get that on tape so I could hear that, and I thought it was on this tape. But when I went back, or not the tape, the YouTube video recording, which you're going to check out at The Church of Rock, all one word if you want. It's pretty cool. You can hear it loud and clear, and you can hear these obnoxious keyboards that are almost, like I say, punk rock in their presentation. Not on purpose, I don't think, but I could be wrong, man. It could be wrong. They might have done that on purpose just to be obnoxious. Who knows, man? A lot of weird tension in the air. Everybody was looking at each other when that happened, and it was just a real moment where you noticed, okay, this poor guy's been through hell. I'm just going to try to forget that. But unfortunately, that is one of the memories that sticks out, and that's not even on the recording. My friends, thanks for sticking in there for this long to hear this story. I appreciate each and every one of you for watching my true rock, punk, metal, and other stories. And I got a couple curveballs coming up for you. People are asking about some of my own personal experiences. I'm going to honor that request. Thanks for being here. Have a great week, you guys. I'll probably be back tomorrow or the next day. Cheers.